Evening all. Hi all. I'm just checking is audio okay, and is board okay for my stream viewers? Okay. Okay. Just making sure. Everyone okay? Everyone had a good time in chess this week? Great. All go. Okay. This is an amazing Olympiad. It's quite special. Progressing through Kasparov Olympiads. What's special about the 30th Olympiad, you might ask? Well, it's interesting because, let me just get my PGN. The 30th Olympiad, believe it or not, Kramnik made his first appearance for the Russian team, and the USSR had broken up into constituent, countries like Ukraine. So there was that, and there was FIDE master Vladimir Kramnik, who ended up, and we're going to have to look at this next week, he ended up with a higher rating performance than Kasparov, higher than 2900. This was a FIDE master, about 2580 FIDE at the time. So that was incredible. The Russian team won it. Kasparov on board won. The previous Olympiads, him and Karpov were playing in a World Championship. They couldn't be there, but Russia had won it even without them. And actually, Ivanchuk was on board one in that one. And here, in this Olympiad, Kasparov was playing Ivanchuk in one of the rounds. So, some very interesting games. But let's have a look at the first game against Sebelo, who was 2-5-1-5. So this is Croatian team. Okay, Miso Sebelo, Croatian team. Kasparov kicked off with knight f3, unassuming. Okay, so yeah, knight f6, and now decides to play c4. So English opening transposition after g6, g3. Okay, so a solid start for white, kind of avoiding kind of Grunfeld stuff actually. Playing d5 is less attractive here than usual, perhaps. Black just plays symmetrically with c5. So bishop g2, bishop g7, we have symmetry. And now white plays d4. Okay, both sides castle actually now. And now we see knight a6 supporting that c5 pawn, perhaps. But often after d5 you might see d6 and knight c7 with the idea of later playing for b5. In fact, after knight c3 we see d6 here. White doesn't have to play d5 at all. He plays actually b3, just preparing to maybe fianchetto his bishop. Black plays bishop g4. I better shut the door. The dog's barking. Hang on a sec. Okay, pardon me. So bishop g4, and okay, so bishop b2. Okay, it doesn't look that exciting, but the two fianchettoed bishops. How will white, get an advantage from this? Or increase an advantage from this? He's got maybe a slight advantage being white here. Queen d7 looks as though black's interested in the exchange of the light squared bishops. So rook e1 might have the idea that bishop h3 can be answered by bishop h1 now, possibly, but also of course e4 might be on the cards now. So rook a b8 is played, as though black might be interested in later knight c7 and preparing b5. Queen d2, and actually an interesting decision now from black to give up voluntarily the light squared bishop, where bishop takes f3. And white actually accepts double pawns here. He doesn't play bishop takes f3, he plays actually e takes f3. So he's accepting double pawns, but he's getting that pressure on the e file. The pawn can later go to f4, And maybe if the queen wasn't eyeing f5, maybe later f5 would undermine a bit black's king safety. After rook f e8, we do see f4. Okay, so white can also maybe consider, doubling on the e file as well as another plan. But for the moment, black plays c takes d4. So we have queen takes d4 now. Okay, and the knight comes into the center with knight c5, as though maybe knight e6 is going to be useful. Rook a d1 is now played, and black reinforces the knight on c5 with b6. You can imagine if a move like knight h5 is played, that would be a big blunder here. Queen takes c5 with just one apiece. So reinforcing the knight seems a good safety idea to play b6. And Kasparov plays now knight d5, intensifying the pressure on this diagonal. Actually, it looks a little bit menacing, as though e7 and f6 are under scrutiny here. Black shields the e file with knight e6, queen d2, and now after knight takes d5, another pawn structure change with c takes d5. So why would white play c takes d5? Well, it does evict that knight, of course, and he can get rid of this bishop soon, which he does now, weaken black's king safety a little bit with bishop takes g7, and he kicks the knight again, and now he uses a check, and it looks as though white has a very pleasant position after rook c1, because actually that d5 pawn is marking out c6 for rook c6's. So it looks very pleasant, but okay, black now plays a5, and the pawn is just supported, of course. That looks like a natural idea, just to support the pawn. It's taken, and now b5, which seems to give black the idea of knight b6 to c4, potentially. Even though c5 has been taken away, what's to stop the knight coming to b6 maybe at some point? Well, rook c6 rules it out now. Okay, putting pressure to bear on b6. So black's kind of passive here, and his next move doesn't look too healthy. Rook b7, sort of waiting around for something. Now, an amazing move here, unexpected actually. I don't know how many of you would see this move. Those on Play Chess, please hide the notation tab. If you can go to another tab like Openings Book, please do, because I'd like to run some guess the move quizzes for everyone. If I give you 20 seconds, can you see what white played here? Quite surprising. 20 seconds starting from now, and then tell me what you think here. White to play. Anyone? Anyone got it? Go for it. Any move calls here? What does white play here? No idea. No one's got any idea? Well, it's quite subtle. White. Okay, I'll have to reveal it. No, it wasn't rook e6. Someone's mentioned it. Two people have mentioned it on stream. Oh yes, you're all mentioning it now. Okay, f5. Yes, you got rid of the double pawns. Getting rid of the double pawns because, well, as the game showed, after queen takes f5, queen is no longer protecting e8, and so here rook takes d6 is possible. So you've actually got rid of the double pawns. Now, if g takes f5, 5. Possibly in this position, what would be a good move? I mean, it looks as though just bishop h3 might be a good move here. I'm not sure. That looks very uncomfortable for black. Unless anyone can spot a better move, I would assume bishop h3 if g takes f5. Black's pawns are fractured. There might be queen f4 after that, or something even stronger, or even just rook e4 because that pin, and then rook g4 will be not rook g4, rook h4. So it's dangerous anyway. So in the game after f5, actually black played queen takes f5 and allowed rook takes d6. So white seems to be massaging an advantage here with the two rooks huddled like this on the queen side. So rook c6 and now rook d8. And okay, the queen's sort of having a blast down this diagonal, and it's starting to be joined perhaps in some variations with this pawn, the dreaded h4 h5 attack, which I sometimes joke in the current World Championship. That's why people are not winning. They're not using h4 h5, but here it's actually quite good to play h4 because that queen is going down this diagonal. You can imagine how dangerous a pawn would be on h6. So queen d7 was played here actually. Now if the queen, that's interesting, but what if king h2 and then there's bishop h3 maybe. So queen d7 looks strange. Why is the queen evicting it herself with queen d7? It's a good question. Queen d7, it seems to just allow simply h5 without much resistance. So this pawn looks to be getting to be a menace, but surely maybe at some point this might be a threat, but not at the moment. It will be attacking the rook, that sort of threat. Does anyone? Okay, let's try and answer that question. Why did the queen voluntarily step back to d7 here? Can anyone answer that? It's probably quite a hard one to answer, or is it? I just assume because the queen's protecting f2 that king h2 is attractive with bishop h3. Anyone else got anything to say about that? Or should we just move on from there, from queen d7? Okay. 10 seconds. Otherwise, I'm moving on from there. Queen d7. Let's just assume the queen had to go back. And it goes back even further now. After h5, it goes to e8. So maybe the idea is revealed that actually the queen wants to come here to challenge this queen. Bishop h3 seems to introduce a whole host of tactical resources like bishop e6, controlling the c file. So h6 and f6 and bishop h6 could be painful. So black is working on challenging the queen, it seems. Queen f8. Okay, after king g2, mission accomplished. Queen g7, challenging the white queen. Kasparov simply interrupts that challenge with rook e5. Okay, so now we see e6 using this pin on the pawn. Kasparov simply plays queen e3, sidestepping the pin, putting huge pressure now on e6. Look at all this pressure being mounted on that poor pawn. And it looks as though, it's out of the question for this rook to move because there's rook c8 check winning the queen. So knight b2, and now interestingly, h6 puts a fawn pawn on h6. That's THORN. If those of you who have not seen my YouTube channel, I've mentioned this a few times, these fawn pawns, and sometimes it's rare actually. Actually, once I checked many of the Karpov-Kasparov encounters for fawn pawns and actually didn't find many pawns on h6 between Karpov-Kasparov. I think that shows how solid the games were. But in this position we have definitely a fawn pawn, which is really, really dangerous. The queen moves to f6. Okay, And now e6 is just destroyed, isn't it? D takes e6. It's a wreck. You know, what has happened? It's just annihilation time, isn't it? It looks a disaster. D takes e6. So maybe we should question, how did this happen? Could anything have stopped this? So knight d1 attacking the queen, and now just e takes f7 check. Queen takes f7. Okay, queen e2, gaining a bit of time by well, he's putting pressure on the knight. Now there's a threat of rook e7 as well. And no, actually, pardon me, there's no threat of rook e7. The rook's on this. So what is the threat here? It looks as though in this position white is actually threatening bishop e6, pardon me, bishop e6 skewing the queen, which might explain the next move, wanting to sidestep the queen getting skewered. So king moves to f8 here. And now a really nice final move, actually. Can you spot it if I give you 20 seconds here? So king f8. Remember, we've got this dangerous form pawn inhibiting the king. We've got these rooks ready to sort of come down in some variations. But what is the killer move here? And it's, I remember actually recently someone said a lot of tactics are often based on double attack. So that's your clue. If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, what was the final move of the game at move 39? So white play and win. Okay, so some of you have mentioned queen takes d1, which definitely looks like the right idea, but actually queen takes d1 apparently wasn't played. It seems to have the idea similar to the game that this check is lethal. It's just winning material if you know you're just winning your bishop up. But actually in the game queen d2 was played. Queen d2, even more kind of maybe spectacular, quiet move. So same idea. I wonder if there isn't, I hope embarrassing there isn't any tactical flaw wrong with queen takes d1. That does seem to work as well. Maybe there are several winning moves here. I can't see what black would do against this particularly either, actually. Okay, so either queen d2, or give yourself some points. Either queen d2 or queen takes d1. So that's the idea. The rook's kind of overloaded, protecting the knight and the back row. So it's a bit of a crushing game out of nowhere, it seems. So what happened here? Let's have a look at this game again. So it started off rather quietly with a kind of double fianchetto from white. Remember, in a crucial game actually against Karpov once in the World Championship match, he used a double fianchetto. He had to win the last game, and he managed to, a grueling game, and he managed to maintain his title by winning it. So sometimes he does like, Kasparov does like the old double fianchetto. And here, you know, with the double pawns, it seems white has a beautifully comfortable position, and the advantage was somehow just increased. This bishop maybe is great because of this potential maybe of this diagonal later, and you know, black's king might be a bit exposed here as the game demonstrates. I've actually seen my good friend Alex, who plays the English Opening, win some games like this with this bishop coming later to the diagonal. It's maybe a common theme for the English Opening player, that the fianchetto bishops can be quite venomous, you know, later. So rook c6 getting a kind of bind, and now f5 undoubling the pawns, and the queen just went back of its own accord defensively. But this undermining is brutal, really, because this bishop's always lurking behind the scenes to get onto these diagonals. So, you know, with the knight over here, the rook over here, these pieces are not far away from the king, really. So bishop h3, it's like there's a lot of attacking resources just basically poised around the king to get to the black king in this position already. It's really almost unbearable. So black's you know, parrying the queen, only a temporary respite, and this desperate looking, you know, e6 move is played. So why? Okay, as a question, why did black play e6? Was there anything else that could have been done here? It looks as though, you know, the knight's kind of stranded. It has got no squares. It's all kind of covered. If white has a move or two, what would he do? Maybe, you know, similar to the game, he'd play queen e3 and then h6 perhaps, because e7's a target on this file. Okay, so it looks pretty bad anyway. So it just was in meltdown now, black's position after d takes e6. Maybe he was in time trouble or something, because these moves were all before move 40, so maybe he was desperately short of time. One would assume on the classical FIDE time control that once they reach move 40 they get an extra hour, but here it's pointless, because now a crushing move is played at move 39, so no checkpoint is useful here of getting an extra hour. It's end of game. Okay, so let's go on to another game. Oh, now this is very topical. This opponent we've heard of before. I'm sure most people have heard of Kamsky before. So he's playing Gata Kamsky, 2655. See, the stakes have been raised because of the split up of the old USSR. He's playing now. Sorry, pardon me. Kamsky's USA. Why do they think? Sorry, Kamsky used to be, you know, USSR. Sorry, he's of course USA. Yes, United States of America. 2655. But he was part of the old USSR. So all the teams have been strengthened. Many other teams have got huge, you know, players playing for them. So compared to previous Olympiads, he's really playing a lot tougher opposition in this one. So Kamsky is actually playing white here. 1992 Olympiad. I managed to put 2 black games in the mix in my PGN. So let's flip the board flip. Okay, so Kamsky playing white, d4, and oh, this is great. This is a King's Indian. So King's Indian is such a fun opening. It makes such a beautiful change from the Slavs. I mean, it used to be really popular back then, the King's Indian. So and we have here the Simish variation, f3. So Gata Kamsky playing f3 and playing a kind of primitive system at some level that, you know, maybe this sort of thing, you know, this sort of thing, like a kind of Sicilian dragon. So e5, putting pressure on the dark squares. c6, black is preparing to get some counterplay on the c file, and he does take on d5. And now a6, so this plan of b5 looks interesting. It provides a peg on c4 and the semi-open c file. So bishop d3 is now played. And now we see knight h5. So the knight might be useful as for a pawn sacrifice, because you want to liberate this bishop, this beautiful King's Indian bishop on the diagonal. Okay, and Kamsky, you know, he doesn't seem to care about knight f4, and he allows this kind of pawn sack idea. He plays g4, funny enough. So Kasparov plays knight f4, but bishop f4 isn't played here. Actually, bishop c2 is played, reserving the option of bishop f takes f4. Okay, so b5. So black is really striving for counterplay across the diagonal and across the c file. Queen f2. Now knight d7, and it looks as though these dark squares might be useful as well at some point for black, as well as b4, maybe useful move. So knight ge2, b4 is actually played now, dislodging a knight. And now a5, which implies that the bishop might find a useful role on this diagonal after a5. And it's here that Kamsky takes the pawn with the knight, seemingly more comfortable than before to take this pawn. So is it a poison pawn or something? Well, black's definitely got some sort of compensation here. Even though this pawn's protected technically by the knight, the e5 square looks quite juicy for a knight. Black might even consider f5 at some point, but at the moment it seems locked down. White's locked down f5. So for the moment, Kasparov is content with knight e5. White castles, queenside, and now knight c4 is played. And it looks as though, well, b2 still looks as though it's defended, even though these two are out to get it. Bishop e3. Curious that it's, you know, white is preparing bishop d4 maybe to parry the bishop, and Kasparov is not having that. He takes that off, losing, you know, an advanced attacking piece, of course. Rook b8 now, which kind of implies, you know, what is going on here? Is it going to be b3? Is this bishop going to get on this diagonal? Maybe this knight's going to be targeted. Okay, so bishop b3, bishop d7, and it looks as though actually with bishop d7 that's better, isn't it, than this, because now there's queen e8 as a battery. If you really want to attack b8, you've locked the knight out of b6 for a moment, but you want to victimize this knight on a4, and after king b1, in fact, the knight is victimized now. So queen e8, so where does it go? It has to go to b6, and it does go to b6, but it's kind of stranded for a moment, or is it? Bishop b5, can it not go back to c4 at least? So bishop b5 kind of implies actually knight c4, there's a4, and that's goodbye knight. So knight c4 is out of the question here. Rook d2, and now black presses on with a4, so he's squeezing Kamsky's queen side. Bishop d1. Of course, if bishop c4, then we have I think rook takes b6 with the bishop hanging, so that's out of the question. So the bishop's pushed back to d1 here, and now we see rook b7, which sort of implies that maybe you know, queen b8 might be on the card, b3 later maybe. So e5, and actually, you know, trying to shut down this diagonal. But b3 now. So this looks like a dangerous attacking pawn, which would be uncomfortable to leave there. There aren't too many options, I think, for white. So white takes that, and he takes, and you know, his king on the b file, and we've got these two targets as well as tempo gainers. So the first one, the knight is used, and there's a lot of pressure being brought on this b file and coordinating maybe with the bishop on the diagonal, the beautiful King's Indian bishop here. So the knight moves finally, and now Kasparov snaps it off and takes on e5, So huge threat now of rook takes b2 has emerged. So white's really on the defensive. He plays queen e2, desperately trying to defend b2. The queen goes to a7 now, preparing all sorts of nasties, either a8 or b8. This could be useful to come down here. So this bishop is horrible compared to this one. Black's king is cozy here, blocked in by the pawn here, shielding the king, whilst this pawn is just, you know, it's in the firing line. The white king is just much weaker than the black king here. So how does this progress? After rook c1, rook a8. These threats are difficult to stop. So b3, which protects now a2 instead of the bishop by rook, preparing an evacuation it seems, but how effective will this be? In fact, check isn't played immediately, instead bishop f4 just skewing the rooks. King c2, the king starts to evacuate, but rook e7, Kasparov is not so keen on the obvious check. He takes time to kick the queen. And again, he doesn't commit his queen to a2, he plays queen c5. So keeping the skew on the rooks, keeping all these threats like rook a2, and generating some more threats, more tension. After rook b1, rook e3, infiltration on the dark squares now. So queen d4, now it's only the rook protecting the queen here, and that's undermined with rook a2. After king d2, we see in this position a very neat move. Rook takes f3, knowing that if queen takes c5, there's rook takes d2 check and then take. So what can be done about this rook? It looks awful, and white in desperation here. It is a totally desperate position. Gatakamsky sacrifices his queen for bishop and rook, which doesn't really help much. He plays queen takes f4. So after rook takes f4, yes, he's got for a moment rook and bishop and queen, but now check, queen takes h2 check, and Kasparov will be taking the rook on a2. Thanks very much. So that was really brutal. That's not the kind of game you get out of a Slav defense. This was an absolutely brutal King's Indian game. I've played sometimes, you know, games like this in over the board. It's really good fun to kind of, you know, get the full power of the King's Indian bishop, and especially in blitz, to get this bishop liberated with a nice kind of pawn sacrifice, with the knight coming to f4 sometimes, just to stretch out that bishop. It seems g4 was just asking for this dark square disaster early on, to play a move like g4. Okay, so black generated tons of counterplay here on the queen side. The knight was seen as a target, and we're going to end up, you know, we're transforming the position where these are coming off, and we're ending up with this bishop versus, you know, epoxy bishop as a counterpart soon. So even though that's exchanged off, and this bishop's going to be exchanged off for this, all we need is this beautiful bishop and the rooks and queen working against the king. So that's what really happens in terms of exchanges. So this knight is coming off now. So this opposite colour bishop scenario, as often with the opposite colour bishops in the middle game, can be a huge extra attacking piece, because the opponent can't defend so easily on the square of this colour. He's got a light square bishop, and black's coordination is just beautiful on b2 here. So the interesting thing, a lot of us perhaps would be tempted for immediate checks, you know, Pats or Caesar check, plays a check, but Kasparov's continuation here perhaps is very instructive. maybe he didn't see such a clear path with checks. He just skewered the rooks and took the centre with some rook infiltrations first. And this is very, very powerful stuff. Crushing, really. And now finally the check we made just by a rook. So rook takes f3, and the queen is itself a liability here on d4. So white's got no options here other than to sacrifice the queen, which is hopeless anyway. So that's how Kamsky was dealt with in 1992. He's nowadays he's a favourite, to win the US Championship every year. So okay, let's look at another game. Okay. Now, this is another one which is of great interest because of the spelling, actually. I believe, okay, now correct me if I'm wrong, but surely this guy sounds a lot like Alexei Shirov. I hope I'm correct, because Latvia 2655, but the name is spelt wrong. Now maybe this is a grandmaster which I haven't heard of before, Sirovs, but Alexei, Latvia, surely this is who we know as Alexei Shirov. Would anyone disagree with that? Was there actually a grandmaster called Sirovs? I think it's just an alternate spelling for the name. So a 2655, very strong, Olympiad this one for Kasparov. So playing black. Everyone agree this was Alexei Shirov? Or am I making an embarrassing blunder? Okay, let's assume anyway it's Shirov. So d4 was played. Okay, so knight f6, and we get another fantastic King's Indian defense. Okay, so this is why I really like Kasparov and Fischer actually as well. That they both played, the King's Indian defense. And perhaps I should ditch the French defence after recent disasters this season, so I might join them with the Sicilian defence next season as well. The King's Indian does serve me well overall statistically, so this is another King's Indian with more classical bishop e2. Okay, and this classical variation, if you translate that for the King's Indian defense player, basically this is an invitation to attack with all your pawns on the king side later, a bit like this, end of white king. That's the general plan in this line. So black retreats the knights to get the pawns out of the way for this pawn storming business. Okay, so bishop e3, f5. Okay, so after f3, f4. Of course, the problem is, the queen side can be blown to bits with the thematic c5, breaking the pawn chain at d6, which is the exploitable part of the pawn chain here. So how does Kasparov get a fast kingside attack here going? Curiously, he doesn't play g5 here. He plays h5 first. Now, I think that there's a reason for this move order, that if he plays g5, I think the Shirov's system was named after Shirov, was g4, because then if takes, you then play king g2, and maybe you can kind of try and defend. But with h5 first, this little subtlety for King's Indian experts, you're discouraging g4. So an important little difference there. So now after c5, then you play g5. Okay, because you don't, black would love to take on g4, just in one go like that. So c takes d6, c takes d6. Now a4. So preparing like knight b5 and maybe to victimize the dark squares. Okay, so knight g6, knight b5. So is Kasparov concerned about the a7 pawn? Not really, not usually, but he does actually kick the knight here. So white faffs around with knight a3. So knight f6, knight c4, but again revisiting these dark squares looks a bit scary. But black carries on now with the kingside attack, g4. And to accelerate this kingside attack, this pawn sacrifice is always very useful to rip open some dark squares. So this is standard thematic pawn sacrifice in the King's Engine, introduced in, I believe, the 1970s games of Ullman, who Fischer looked up to in the King's Engine, and you saw this pawn sacrifice with g3 to accelerate black's kingside attack. So here, in fact, g3 is used here. So g3, it's basically ripping open many dark squares, diagonals. Even this diagonal is sometimes useful. At the moment, of course, white's got b6 under firm control. So hg, fg, but f4, h4 as well. Okay, this is quite dangerous for white already. So bishop takes g3, h4. Okay, so the bishop gets tucked on h2. Now the knights are celebrating the use of f4 here, iron grip on the dark squares. Queen b6. Please, can I have an exchange of queens? No way. Take my d6 if you want it. Queen g5 is the answer to that. So offering up d6, but starting to point at white's king, and this knight f4 would also attack the bishop as well as g2. So knight d3 guards for a moment f4, but now Kasparov uses knight g3, attacking that bishop. The bishop defended with rook f2, which does lose a pawn, but what else? What else does white do here? He loses a pawn because now forcing move, knight takes e2 check, and rook takes f3, but d6 is loose here. Okay, so is it a big deal? Well, it is a big deal because it's attacking d3 as well. Okay, so we have here a very exciting position. So knight takes d6, offering the knight. So what on earth is going on here? The knight's taken, knight takes c8, undermining b7. Okay, perhaps, and actually there might be a better point to this. Kasparov actually plays king h7. So what if Kasparov did play rook takes c8 here? He didn't play rook takes c8 in this position, possibly because of check. Check faults the rook and king. So in this position, after knight takes c8, Kasparov actually played king h7. Still happy with this position. There's still attacking potential against the white king. Okay, so in this position now, rook takes c8 is really threatened. The knight goes to d6, as though maybe knight f5 is on the cards. Knight f4 now, attacking the rook and g2. It's taken. E takes f4, liberating the bishop, threatening nasties like bishop d4 check to win the queen. So knight f5, it seems just in time, controlling d4. Rook g8. Doesn't mind if the knight wants to take. He's still got pressure on g2. He's got h3 and stuff like that. The queen takes on b7, and also f3, of course. Rook f2, and now the defense is stripped away. This looks like a crushing move, but actually the game still went on after this quite a bit. Rook d2, challenging that defensive rook. And a nifty defensive move from Shirov. Queen A7. So actually he's maintaining his pin and he's elegantly defending F2. Okay, Kasparov unpins with King H8, pardon me, King H8 unpinning here, and the Queen comes back using this knight on F5 to challenge the Queen and attack the Rook. Oh dear, has the attack dissipated here? Is this all a bit unexpected? Because White, if the Queen's come off, hasn't White got some trump cards here to deal with? Like these pawns? What can Kasparov do apart from exchange queens here? So he takes the queens off. But now Bishop D4 looks pretty nasty. Okay, but there is a Rook to be taken and is taken. Check. And we have an interesting endgame now. Rook F2 is pointless because Rook takes G2 will win the Rook anyway. So Shirov just makes this a bishop sacrifice with King H2. He's got these pawns which he might think have, you know, provides compensation for being a bishop down here. So G takes F3. So very interesting position. So will these pawns triumph over the bishop? Rook G3 attacking one of them already. Rook D1, which looks logical. Get these pawns going. Are they not going to conquer the bishop? Bishop F4. Bishop's doing a nice blockade job on this E4 pawn and threatening nasties for checking. D6 not minding. Rook takes F3. King G2. Check. And now the Rook comes back. It seems as though this is another scenario. Unfortunately, the dynamism of the pawns doesn't seem that impressive compared to the bishop. So D7 and the pawn is blocked. So black looks to be a bishop up for not too much to worry about. The king is now coming also to help. So bishop D8, not only protecting the pawn but blockading this one. But now there's this potentially running a pawn to deal with. B5 introduces another passed pawn. So can Kasparov handle all these passed pawns? Well, he takes it. Takes. Check. And he comes behind that one. Rook H5. Now if the rooks get exchanged off, imagine the rooks get exchanged off. Black's got the dark square bishop. He needs a light square bishop. So that pawn would be useless, wouldn't it? It would be a draw if the rooks came off here. King E6, A6. Okay, takes, protect the pawn for a moment. The rook's attacked, it moves to H5. Okay, so what's the winning technique here? Kasparov is going to grab another pawn. Yes, he grabs another pawn. So it's rook and bishop versus rook. Check. Now after king H3, rook A4 here, and actually Shirov resigns here. He didn't play on. This is move 62. So he's kind of convinced he's going to lose this. I think Black's winning method might actually be to keep the rook on, to arrange eventually to take this pawn, because he's protecting that pawn, so the bishop can munch this pawn, and then this pawn can be herded with rook and bishop. So you don't want to take the rooks off here, otherwise it will be a draw. Okay, so that was a complex King's Indian game, just in brief, very brief overview. Let's do an even briefer overview of this King's Indian game. So it was the classical with surprisingly, the queen's coming off and turning into a kind of bishop sacrifice, scenario. So creative play from both sides. It seemed at some point Black's attack looked really, really dangerous, but this is such an interesting continuation. After knight takes d6, very clever to try and get this stuff going. So White was playing very, very resourcefully here, and even managing, he gets some nice pins and protection of his own king simultaneously with Queen A7. But this unpinning, this bishop's ready to get onto this dangerous diagonal, which it does do after Queen E3. Maybe possibly engines will find better moves. Queen E3 does go a bishop down, but it seemed quite tricky. So Bishop D4, very, very clever move, logical, winning material, and the endgame. These pawns were just mopped up, so they looked quite dangerous for a while though. But then it became clear, I think, to Shirov, resistance was futile. So a long game there, 62 moves. Okay. Okay, let's go on to another game. Kasparov as White in this game. In fact, I don't know, we're approaching an hour. I wonder if we should make this the last game to have a look at this week and just carry on next week. So Kasparov as White against Hutchinson, Johan Hutchinson. So we'll flip the board. Okay. So knight f3, again popular move by Kasparov in this Olympiad, and then English opening with c4. So not committing the d pawn here, keeping it distinct away from any Nimzo Indians type stuff. But in fact, after knight c3, Black plays bishop b4 anyway. So not quite Nimzo, but White is still playing his favourite move that he would play against Nimzo to collect the dark square bishop, and maybe this diagonal is going to be good for this bishop as the trump card later. So so White does this, gladly collects that dark square bishop, and gladly puts the bishop on the fianchetto line. So is this already potentially dangerous for Black? This scenario. Well, Black's idea is he's got good central control, and maybe he can construct something against this dark square bishop later. So knight d7. Okay, and now White blocks in his own bishop with d4 for a moment. Knight e4, and now c5. So it looks as though maybe the c file is going to be useful. c4 might be a target at some point. Bishop d3. Okay. Black maintains that knight now here with f5. After castles, we have seemingly a very aggressive intention after queen e8 to come to the king side. So is this quite kind of dangerous, this plan? Maybe the rook can join in. Kasparov not worried. He just eliminates first that knight on e4 here. Knight d2. So knight takes, queen takes. Queen h5 happens anyway. Bishop e2. Okay, queen g5 threatening mate here. Okay, f3. Of course not bishop f3. That would just run into bishop takes f3. Just end of game. So f3. And Black carries on in the centre. Rook ad8. So he's reinforcing his centre against, say, takes. He's got the knight protected. Okay, so So white has the bishop pair here, but we've seen, as we've seen in previous Olympiads, Kasparov does well with the bishops when he collects them in the Nimzo. This is kind of Nimzo Indian looking, this position. Rook ad1, and now an attempt maybe to sort of blunt this bishop, e5. Okay, so e5. Kasparov takes this. Okay, and now b5. So in this position, it looks as though queen d6 to c7 is one way to infiltrate the black position. But at the moment, of course, black is also eyeing e3. But the next move takes the eye off e3 because black plays f4. So he's blocked in his own queen from attacking e3. And it's this opportunity, it's not queen e3 check anymore. Kasparov does plunge in to black's position now with the move queen d6. So he's doing a sort of pawn sack here to get in this very dangerous queen c7. There's a lot of pressure on these two minor pieces. So takes queen c7. Okay. The bishop protects d7. So what's the points here? Okay, rook d5, putting pressure on e5 now. So the queen, the rook and the bishop all pushing on that e5 pawn here. And also, if you look at this pin means f4 might be on the cards. There's no rook takes f4 because the queen's going to take here. Rook takes f4, queen takes d8. So f4 is actually also on the cards here. And maybe it's this or some other reason that black in this position thinks it's quite critical. This is quite unpleasant. He plays actually rook d8, rook de8, giving up two minor pieces just for a rook, which doesn't look too healthy usually to do this. So rook takes d7, getting two minor pieces for a rook, and these bishops do seem quite powerful. Rook d8, check, and now taking on e5. It looks as though black's busted here, because two bishops against the rook is usually going to be overwhelming. Okay, so black does exchange off queens and plays rook d2. That can be adequately defended now with rook e1. Rook a2, and now f4, which just sort of implies, bishop f3 if given the chance. Rook takes e3, that sort of thing. But for the moment, after rook d8, not the routine bishop f3 actually. That might run into something quite clever. Although I'm not really sure. White played h4, which looks to introduce this sort of stuff as well as give the king an escape square. Rook d2, it seems hopeless because bishop f3, white seems solid, and he's attacking e3 now. Takes on a3, h5, so h6 menacing threat. After h6 now to stop, maybe h6, king h2, black resigns here. So another game which made to look kind of easy by Kasparov with d4. He's or c4 even. He's making everything look like dangerous attacking weapons. Black resigns here. It looks as though, well, there's no problems here for white. Not enough compensation for the material. Maybe the king can even come in, possibly, or f5. F5 might not even be necessary. So let's have a quick look in overview and summary at this game. So a kind of Nimzo Indian transaction without being a Nimzo Indian, where white has the bishop pair and plays kind of primitively, it seems, to go for white's king. It didn't really get anywhere, this queen h5. White was happy to play f3 here, possibly better than g3 if Kasparov chose it. g3 would just be weakening the whole diagonal, maybe unnecessarily. f3 with prospects on the d file, okay, and this diagonal is also looking like a danger point. So we saw e5, and after b5, I don't know if this was a critical mistake really. It looks as though this is a very dangerous maneuver in retrospect, queen d6 to c7. It's difficult though. I mean, what does black do about queen d6? If he had played knight f6, maybe even, you know, white can play queen takes d8 here. 2 rooks for the queen might be good, and then that's pretty horrible. So he played f4, so we get this infiltration, which unfortunately in this position black was now stuck. So in this position he gave up material, and then that was it was just basically lost after this. Okay, I hope there's something to get from these new Kasparov games. This was quite an exciting Olympiad, with Kramnik doing brilliantly as well. But we'll carry on Kasparov's games maybe next week, and Kramnik's the week after, possibly, if there's interest. Okay, hope you are enjoying your chess and the World Championship. Okay, thanks very much. Until next week. Thanks very much. I'm gonna stop now. So see you next week, and hope you have a good week.